All right. Well, I think if you were impressed with the depth of feedback that we received from the panel members, you're going to be blown out of the water here by our next speaker. We are just so privileged that he has flown from Los Angeles to join us here at this summit today. So without giving too much away, I'm going to introduce the CEO of Sanmar, Bruce Anderson.
Flew from Los Angeles to be here. I'm not from Los Angeles. When I got out of high school, when I got out of college, I spent 9 years working in the inner city of Cincinnati. Lived in the city, worked in the city, and I can remember vividly to this day the gunfights outside the house. It was a block away. There was a police officer killed. Crack house right next door. But the thing I remember most is the ever-present sense, pervasive sense of hopelessness. Last year, several of us had the opportunity, a privilege, of going out to Los Angeles and looking at a couple programs. We had the experience of going over to Homeboy Industries, having lunch there, and at Homegirl Bakery. And we were able to meet some of the people there that our speaker, Father Boyle, works with. One of the things that they showed us was a shirt that they sell. And the shirt says, "Nothing stops a bullet like a gun." Or, yeah. That's true. We can do stand-up, huh? Nothing stops a bullet like a job. And I thought about that, and I thought he's demonstrating is true. But as I thought about it, nothing stops a bullet like hope. And nothing stops a bullet like a man with courage and vision who's willing to speak truth to the hopeless. Father Greg Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. I recognize I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so it's got me a little nervous. It's the privilege of my life for 30 years to work with gang members and thousands of them, and have come to know them and love them and be so educated and changed by them. The day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I am closer to God than these folks. People like Joey Ray, a young man who I met in prison. I was chaplain there, and so he ended up coming to work at Homeboy, and he became a much in-demand speaker, so he would always be asked to go to high schools and stuff, and he just loved it and was quite good at it. And we were having dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly, and he said, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. That's some good advice there. That's just a way of saying brace yourselves. There's a vision that undergirds your morning here, and it's a vision of wanting things to look differently than they currently look, and it's about somehow creating a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we, in our own particularity, find a way to dismantle the barriers that exclude? And to that end, we stand out at the margins, and we try to locate ourselves with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. The only way to erase the margins is to stand out at them with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while, all of us have had this exquisite privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. The goal is kinship. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. In fact, all those things that we long for are really byproducts of this undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so we choose to create a community of kinship. And people will accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And so we try to allow other voices to get heard. So for 30 years I've been working with gang members, and I'm so grateful to them daily as I've been communicating with them even while I'm here in DC. And so one of the things they've taught me is how to text, and I'm so grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. I can't be alone in being vexed by this stupid autocorrect thing. I mean, it's the bane of my existence, you know. And once a homegirl named Bertha, she wrote me on a Sunday and she said, "Where you at?" And I said, "Well, I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas." So I'm about to speak to a room of nuns. So I said, "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas." And I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. You know, which she thought was pretty darn interesting, you know. And homies, even while I'm here, I'm staying with my brother and his wife in DC, and they're just, you know, hair on fire, and they all mistake me for a ATM machine. And it's like, gosh, I have to finish off my rent, and they're going to cut off my lights. It's all that kind of stuff, only all the time. And I just didn't have any money this one time when a guy wanted me to help him with his rent, and I just wrote, "Things are tight." Then I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote back, "Sorry to hear that. You know, what about my rent?" So there I am in a car with two homies, older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, and the two of them, they're going to help me give a talk at a high school. So we finished our morning meeting, which is this big thing we have, about 300 people packed in this reception area. That's how we begin our day. And then we got in the car. So Manuel's in the front seat, Poncho's in the back seat. And older guys, tattooed, been to prison and stuff. And so we're driving to go to give this talk, and Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I say, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our workers. And trust me, I would not want this job because this may come as a surprise. Gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. So I say, "What's he say?" He goes, "Oh, hang on, it's dumb. Let me find it here. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing. I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? It's important to bridge any distance that exists between us. Even in service, all of you are engaged in service, your kids are engaged in service, our educational system requires that service be part of their path. But there's a distance in service even, service provider, service recipient. You want to bridge even that, At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. Service is where you start, but you don't want to end there, because service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of exquisite mutuality. And that's important. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was absolutely the best listener I've ever met in my life. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed, only you, singularly focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once, quite famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual," which of course is the hope. How do we bridge even that distance in our service of the folks on the margins? The truth be told, we don't go to the margins to make a difference there. We go to the margins so that the folks on the margins will make us different. So I remember no homie got more job opportunities through Homeboy Industries than this guy we all called Dreamer. Little mocosito knucklehead I knew since he was a little kid growing up in the projects. And he's doing okay now. He's like in his mid-40s. That makes my ass feel old. But yeah, he's in his mid-40s. But in his early 20s, he was, kind of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our social enterprises. This is a bad microphone?
Hold at the top.
Okay.
Hold the bottom.
All right. So self-defecating humor, no shit. So I'm going to presume that you've heard some of that. Anyway, but Caesar, I would find him a Dreamer was his the gang name, and we'd find him a job here and there, and he'd always gravitate to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. So this was a pattern that kept repeating itself. And so sure enough, he'd finished a 4-week stretch in county jail, a probation violation. And then there he was sitting in front of my desk in my office, and he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." And I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I picked up the phone and I called a friend of mine named Gary, who ran a vending machine company in Alhambra, California. And he had hired homies in the past, so I'm thinking maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, Gary says, "Yeah, you tell him he can start tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer begins work at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, he's in my office, and I couldn't believe it. I go, "Serio, Pedro, I can't believe you're sitting here. Híjole, Madre Santa. Here we go all over again, But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck, and he says, "Damn, G, This paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh. Who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no. No, that would be God, yeah. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, the only thing I really recall was that the two of us literally fell out of our chairs. We were laughing so hard. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So Homeboy Industries was born 30 years ago when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles called Dolores Mission. And it was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, making it, according to the LAPD, the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of the city. So I buried my first young person in 1988, killed because of this sadness. And I buried my 220th a month ago. Not all from that community, of course, but I work with gang members, so I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, and so they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls, selling drugs. They were violent. And so I walked out to them, and I would sort of isolate them. You know, I'd go, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our elementary school, grades K to 8, the first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor of the school was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns together in the living room, and I sat them down and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And they said, sure. Literally, that was the extent of their discernment process. And so we were off and running, and this brought gang members in large numbers to the church, not to church services, of course, but to our property, which created something of a disconnect. You know, people started to say, wait a minute, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. So that was a good gospel challenge, I think. And then they kept saying over and over again, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the projects, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. And so we couldn't wait. So we invented things like crews, mainly, you know, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a graffiti removal crew, a crew to build our child care center on the church property. And then in 1992, 25 years ago, was the unrest as a result of the Rodney King beating. And the whole city just absolutely exploded. Every pocket of poverty, except one, which was where my parish was. And so LA Times wanted to know why that was the case, and so they asked me, and I said, well, I think it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival gang members working side by side. So maybe these were the characters most likely to torch the place. And so they had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, or a reason not to torch their own community. And so that's why. And a movie producer named Ray Stark read the article and summoned me. Now, Ray Stark had, at the time, $500 million. And he asked me, how should he use his money? And now when I look back on it, boy, did I undershoot my request here. But I said, why don't you buy this abandoned bakery across the street from the school? And, it's got ovens. We could put hairnets on rival gang members. They could bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was the extent of my business plan. And Ray Stark said, sure. So we were off and running. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name, which we had previously called ourselves Jobs for a Future, to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. Not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew people didn't want gang members in their homes? I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing, but we've backed our way into now. We are the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on our planet. 15,000 folks. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to reimagine their lives, to cease to plan their funerals and plan their futures instead. We also have started a thing called the Global Homeboy Network. And so we have 147 programs across the country modeled on Homeboy and 16 outside the country. We gather every August with what we call our partners. We just had our 4th annual meeting. And so rather than franchise, we didn't want to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, with over 5 billion gang members served, So we much rather wanted to give technical assistance and help people give birth to their own kind of approaches from below. And there's a kind of a modality that we have and a strategy and a way of proceeding that all these programs have seemed to embrace, so that's good. So at our place, the centerpiece is our 18-month training program. All the homies want to get in on that because it's a paid gig. And we never call it a job. We don't say that we hire people. We say we bring them in, and we don't want homies who are there for the check, only those who are there for the change. Because an employed inmate, returning citizen, gang member, may or may not return to prison. And an educated one may or may not. But a healed one, I will make this guarantee and bet my entire life, a healed one will not ever go back to prison, period. Ever. And so we want them to engage in that kind of what we call essential healing, because healing, of course, ends in the graveyard, but there's an essential healing that if you can get through that, then you re-identify who you are, you engage in active attachment repair, you deal with what you've just spent the morning talking about, and then you leave after 18 months, and the world will throw at you what it will, but this time you won't be toppled, and that's kind of the goal. So we have lots of classes, everything that you would imagine, anger management and grief and loss, and we still have a school and GED and domestic violence stuff, and we have free tattoo removal. No place on our planet removes more tattoos than we do. were 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, 1 paid physician assistant, and 47 volunteer doctors, 3 laser machines. We have a designated clinic. It's essential when you go to the margins is to listen to folks at the margins. And so tattoo removal was born not because I thought it was a good idea, but because you listen. You know, a homie came, and we started it because of this guy named Frank, who 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison, I had never met him, and he's sitting in front of my desk and tattooed on his forehead like a big old billboard filling the entire space, and pardon my French here, it said, "Fuck the world." And Frank looked at me and he said, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, Frank, you know, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, you know." And I'm thinking, where do I send him? You know, to McDonald's, you know, and do you want fries with that? No, I don't want fries. So naturally, I hired him, and he bagged bread for like 2 years at our bakery. And I went on the lookout for a doctor, a dermatologist with a laser machine. I found one at White Memorial Hospital. He donated 1 hour a month to chip away on Frank's forehead and a few others. And before too long, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted this service. So we couldn't really stay with that arrangement. Parentheses, Frank is currently a security guard at a movie in Hollywood. And there is no trace left of the dumbest thing he had ever done in his life. And proving once and for all, as Sister Helen Prejean tells us, everyone is a whole lot more than the worst things they've ever done. And so we have all our social enterprises. Homeboy Bakery is thriving. Homeboy Homegirl merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. Homeboy Silk Screen, that's been around for about 23 years. 2,500 customers from all over the country, high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to Hagerstown. I'm just saying. We have Homeboy Diners, the only place you can get food at City Hall. We have a restaurant at LAX Terminal 4, American Airlines Terminal. We have a thing called Homeboy Grocery, where we sell chips and salsas and all the Ralph's supermarkets from mid-state to San Diego. We have farmers markets. We have Homeboy Recycling, that's our newest venture, e-waste. And then Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's a kind of if you go to the restaurant there, it's kind of a who's who. You're never going to be in there without some celeb or elected official or somebody, you know, like Jim Carrey, the movie star, goes there often, and Jack Black, and once all the Dodgers came, and let's see. Once, you know, with only 2 hours notice, Vice President Joe Biden came. Motorcade and Entourage and selfies with Uncle Joe. I wasn't there. I was on my annual silent retreat, so I didn't know about it till he came back. And I see a homie named Louie, and Louie's going to debrief me. While you were gone, we were visited by an MVP. I said, "Do you mean a VIP?" That one, VIP. Damn, gee, imagine here at Homeboy Industries, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mick Romney. And I think you can file that one under all white guys look alike. And I think as a result, we added a current affairs class, now that I think of it. But most famously, Diane Keaton showed up for lunch, Oscar-winning actress, and she, Annie Hall and Godfather movies, and she's there with a regular guy who's there once a week, and her waitress is Glenda. Now, Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, gang member, felon, was in prison for a lot of years. She has no idea who this Diane Keaton is, and she gives her a menu, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, well, I'll have that second one. That sounds really good. And it's at that moment something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Oh my God, that just took my breath away when I heard it. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress and attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind, and if you'll permit me. Jesus says to the gathered, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but no, it's about us. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. We're called only to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. That's what the prophet Habakkuk tells us. All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking homies to measure up. We don't believe in it. We believe in holding the mirror up and telling people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth, and here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, especially those on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No balls can keep that out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But we know at Homeboy, part of the task is you have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. Shame and disgrace is really the principal suffering of the poor. And so you kind of want to find the values that, again, if you'll permit me, expressed in the Acts of the Apostles. It's not just a quaint snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community, but things leap out, notions like see how they love one another, and there's nobody needy in this community. My favorite one is an odd one, where it says simply, and awe came upon everyone. And it seems to suggest that the greatest measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I get invited to give a lot of talks, and I was invited once to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And I say yes to stuff, virtually everything, and then I don't pay that much attention to the fine print. And so I knew it was an all-day gang-in service, from 9 to 5. I knew that. I figured I'd be a keynote or maybe speak at lunch or something. And then I discovered that a week before I am to fly, I pull out the letter. And in the not so fine print, it says that it is a gang in service from 9 to 5. I am to be the only speaker at this entire day's event. And so I quickly called two trainees, homies, Andre and Jose, into my office. And I said, look, you're flying with me at the end of the week to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he's like 25 at the time, and a gang member, been to prison, tattooed. He part of our training program, so he's done a lot of things, began in what we call the humble place, which is you just clean urinals for 3 months, and then he ended up as a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man really solid in his own recovery. Now he's helping younger homies with their addiction issues. Not only a prisoner, former prisoner, but also he was a homeless man for a stretch and a heroin addict for an even longer stretch. So he gets up in front of these 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp, and he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said. And then they did what you just did, so we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage. She knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid, and she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For here is the truth of the matter. If we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. On the weekends, although this weekend not, because I'm here all weekend, I say masses as a priest in all these probation camps. We have a lot of them in juvenile halls in LA County. And so, but then my Saturdays are always the same. You know, I always have to race back to Dolores Mission because I've been there now for 35 years, so I know everybody, and homies always ask me to do stuff, you know, so 1 o'clock baptism, 2 o'clock wedding, 3 o'clock quinceañera when a girl turns 15, 4 o'clock exorcism, you know. Just checking to see if you're still listening to me. So this one day, a Saturday, I had just done 2 masses. They're kind of far from town, so I get in, it's like 12:30. I go, gosh, I have a half hour before my baptism. So I race over to my office when, in those days, it was a storefront on First Street. And, I'm content and feliz. I'm opening the mail. I'm all by myself. When all of a sudden this woman walks in, and I find out later her name is Lisa. She's like in her mid-30s. This is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. And she's kind of well known on the streets. She's a prostitute. She's a heroin addict, covered in tattoos, a gang member, a felon. She's kind of famous for being a gritona, which means she screams a lot. She's always screaming at the bartender next door who throws her out of the bar daily. Back in the day when we used to have payphones, she would scream into payphones on First Street, "Just let me stay tonight," pleading with family or friends. And this is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office, and I'm noticing, oh gosh, okay, now it's 12 minutes to 1 in my baptism. She comes right into my office and she plunks herself down and she launches right in. "I need help." I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. I went to Catholic schools all my life, she says. I even graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. In fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall behind her, and her eyes became like 2 ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried and she cried. Till finally she leveled her gaze at me and she said, "I am a disgrace." And suddenly her shame met mine, because when I had seen her step into my office that day, I had mistaken her for an interruption. If we stay strangers to our own wounds and our own brokenness, then we will feel tempted to despise the wounded. In the end, we're called to go to the margins and to widen the circle. In the end, we're called to create a community of kinship where there is exquisite mutuality, no us or them. Once I was interviewed on the Christian Broadcasting Network, and the woman asked me what we do at Homeboy, so I told her everything I told you. And afterwards, she kind of made a face, and she said, "Yeah, but how much time do you spend each day, at Homeboy Industries, praising God?" And I didn't know what to say, so I said, all damn day. And I don't think she liked that answer. But it kind of begs this question for me, which is like, what kind of praise does God have any interest in? So let me finish with this one last story. I get invited sometimes by universities who have forced their students to read my book against their will to speak. So Gonzaga University, which is my alma mater in Spokane, said, can you come? And I said, sure. And then they asked me to bring two homies with me. And so, and I always do it if they're going to pay for it, and I always pick homies in the same way. I always pick rivals, enemies, just so they have to share the same hotel room together, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. It's funny, it reminds me of DC, because I had not long ago brought two homies, and we were going to stay with my brother and his wife, and we were in LAX and getting ready to fly, and this homie, older guy, says, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, why, yes, it's actually a requirement. You can fly American from this moment forward. So I picked two homies, Mario and Bobby. Bobby, African-American gang member, worked in the bakery, and Mario worked in our merchandise store at the time, which is on the premises of our headquarters. I've done this so many times, men and women, maybe 1,000 times at this point, but I've never picked anyone more terrified of flying than this kid, Mario. I mean, he was absolutely panicked and terrified. In fact, he was hyperventilating, We hadn't even gotten on the plane yet. So we were flying out of Burbank Airport, which is a small airport, big bay windows, and Southwest Airlines principally, and they don't have that hermetically sealed chute to get on the plane. You have to walk out onto the tarmac. And Burbank has the benefit of having the stairs that go to the front of the plane, but also the stairs that go to the back of the plane, And so I'm sitting there with Mario. Bobby's off walking somewhere, and our plane arrives. It's early morning. And I said, that's our plane. And I go, oh my God, he may die before we actually climb those stairs, And then I see our flight crew arrives, and two female flight attendants both have 2 large cups of Starbucks coffee, and the two of them are schlepping up the front steps and to get onto the plane. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? You each do a 7-minute snapshot of your stories, just like you told today, and so that I can include you in the question and answer at the end of the thing. And they were terrified, especially Mario, but they did a good job. And then I did my thing, and then we stand in front of the podium, and Mario and Bobby are on either side of me, and I said, well, let's do questions. Yeah, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, and she says, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario stands up to the microphone, and he clutches it, and he says, tall drink of water, very skinny. Yes. And he's just terrified, And she says, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? What advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes, and he clutches the microphone, and he's trembling, and I can feel the emotion rising in him, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say when suddenly he blurts out, and as soon as he says those 2 words, he retreats back to his microphone clutching, closed-eyed retreat, and he trembles all the more, but he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed with emotion that this room full of strangers had decided to return him to himself. And they, in turn, were returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise God has any interest in. And a room full of strangers acknowledged that Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. And so we go to the margins, and the margins get erased because we stood there. Look under your feet, you'll see it. And the circle of compassion widens, and the power of tenderness is compelling.
Thanks so much to Father Greg Boyle. You know, as we think about why we do these trainings, it's about 5 years ago, some folks from Sanmar, we went to a training and we heard a variety of speakers that talked about creative and different ways to approach social issues. And we knew from years and years of serving children, after something had happened, that we wanted to try to do things differently. And so my hope is that by offering trainings like this in our community, that it creates a ripple effect, that there are institutions here that think about what does this